In the deepest arteries of the throne world, past layers of sanctified ferrocrete and ossified prayers, there exist rooms where breath seems blasphemous and heartbeat is thunder. And in those cubes of hush sit the Echo Men, a designation almost no one speaks aloud, a burden so absolute that even the Imperium's famously casual cruelty calls it worse than a firing line. Because for these clerks of extinction, the job is to hear what no soul should hear, to write what no page should hold, to make ledger entries of worlds that stop being. And the administratum maintains no shrine to their work. The ecclesiarchy offers no intercession. The commissariat pretends it is rumor, so the rumor will not look back. Exterminatus is called a sanction and a weapon and a verdict. But those words are too small for what it actually is, because every final cleansing is also a conversation, an exchange across void and warp between the living that deliver judgment and the dying that become the judgment. And like any exchange, someone must receive the last words. So when inquisitorial writs condemn a planet, when virus shells fall like grey rain, when cyclonic warheads split plates and drink oceans, the world screams in a voice that is not metaphor, a pressure wave of prayer and panic that rides the Empyrean in frequencies that choose sanity. And inside vaults where only the necessary light is permitted, that signal is captured, decoded, and transcripted into the Empire's cold archive by hands that tremble only when they remember what hands are. For Seren Malk has been an Echo Man for 27 years when he first hears something that is not a scream. A small man made smaller by grey robes and ritual silence, seated in Vault Tris Delta, 7 kilometers below the Administratum precinct on Teralis. A cube 4x4x4 lined in sound eaters, a single lumen above that casts edges so sharp they seem to cut, a desk where a Vox receiver sits married to components no loyal tech adept would ever sign for. A transcript slate tethered to cogitators buried like roots into the rock, and a chair polished by 17 prior postures, of which 3 rose again to see another sun, while the others simply failed to request their nutrient ration, their minds having found an off switch that Mercy could recognize only too late. His robe carries stains that are a curriculum, brown arcs from the first time he tasted the death of Feroxmore, dark constellations where tears fell while he recorded the final catechism of St. Iloria's orphan hives on Colos Secundus, red crescents from fingernails when he pressed his own throat to still echoing cries hours after signal cutoff, and still each day begins the same way at the hour of reflection as Teralis simulates dawn across gilded towers, Seren descending through checkpoints that grow more absolute, past silent wardens whose eyes never meet his, through doors that seal like tomb lids, until the world of footsteps and weather is gone and only machine hum and recirculated air remains to witness the work. He will not name aloud the first signal of the rotation arrives from the solar segmentum, where Inquisitrix Vare marks Krathor as beyond recall, and the wave comes as static, then as structure, then as a weight. Can Seren adjusts the crown against his temples and begins to type a dying planet into Imperial Gothic. And virus bombs that the writ calls merciful prove anything but as 7 billion miners choke in corridors that were supposed to protect. And he hears them all because that is what the post requires. The foreman who tries to lock a shaft and buys a minute for strangers. The medic who refuses to leave triage and names each patient, because names are the last human thing. The gunner at the sky laser who fires into the void until there is no flesh left to pull the trigger. And between all that noise fall the gaps that break Echo Men more reliably than any shriek. It is the silences that grind the soul. The stretches where imagination is forced to become forensic faith, where a child stops halfway through a sentence and the mind supplies what breath would not carry, where a chorus of thousands falls away, and the empty channel feels louder than the cries, and Echo Men are obliged to document even absence with the same care as presence. So Seren's fingers move with trained calm across the slate, while his jaw clenches in ways he will deny later, noting the minute and second and location and last words and the length of the final rattle and the stated cause per strain, TERS diagnostic. And when the transmission tapers into that terrible stillness that means a new plaque in a file and a blank on a star map, he closes his eyes for 30 sanctioned seconds to remember that his lungs still move, They do not volunteer Echo Men. They select them, though selection is a euphemism for a lifetime of unnoticed testing, and the criteria are sealed behind sigils, but can be guessed by the outcomes. High stress tolerance married to exacting auditory passing, a cathedral's worth of compartments inside the skull, and above all the capacity to keep functioning while knowing function is a kind of complicity. So orphans from sump schools are played recordings to watch which ones flinch. Servo skull handlers learn to narrate atrocity without a tremor. Vox officers are praised when they describe tyrannid digestion calmly, and of 10,000 flagged, a handful make it to facilities that maps omit where conditioning ascends in steps, and medici sworn to quiet observe and erase and reassign as needed, until those who remain hear a child's last plea and log it with the same neat hand used for weather. No regimen reaches forever, because pattern recognition is the birthright of human minds even when those minds have been sanded smooth. So in his 8th year, Seren notices an inconsistency while shepherding the demise of Mortalum Hive, a world whose population should have required 47 hours to pass, yet fell into silence at 39, leaving 8 hours of death unaccounted for. And the official justification cites atmospherics he has learned to distrust, because after thousands of worlds he can identify the shape of incompletion. And in the following years similar gaps appear, voices that end too cleanly to be natural, static that carries contours like speech, whispers that do not match any language catalogued, but carry intent like a weight placed gently on the chest. Regulation demands he file anomalies. Bureaucracy ensures the replies never change, and so he becomes a taxonomy of dismissal, atmospheric interference, receiver drift, operator fatigue, stress-induced pareidolia, all stamped and archived and forgotten. Yet in the vault the pattern persists, reaching out again when Metallica Tears dies, and he hears prayers to machine spirits chanted backwards by throats that should not have remained. Or when Demeter Prime is scoured, and the background resolves into a children's chorus, though every nursery was the first to succumb, and most unsettling of all the shrine world Philia Secundus, whose cardinalate falls to corruption, and whose surface becomes slag under cyclonic caress, yet whose signal continues for days in voices that speak places he has no map for. The program cultivates isolation as both shield and scalpel, so Echo Men pass in corridors with collars high and eyes low, speaking only into recorders and never to one another in words that might breed other words. But solitude is a membrane, not a wall, and messages begin to migrate the way water does through stone, in scratches behind lavatory grates, in tap codes on water pipes, in the way a glance lingers long enough to mean yes. I heard it too, and through that clandestine trickle, Saren learns that Joran Vale up in Vault Secundus Alpha has 19 years in post and shakes constantly, and does not speak aloud anymore, but writes careful letters he burns after reading. Letters that tally anomalies the way a chaplain tallies Sinsvale's notes, confirm what Seren fears, and secretly hopes he is wrong about. That the irregularities are not random and not rare. That now nearly a fifth of death casts contain content that is something more than agony. And worse, that the signal seems to know who receives it, tucking personal debris into the torrent, the way a river carries leaves from your own childhood garden. So one night on Corvus Mine, a voice uses Serene's birth name that no record should retain. And another time a cadence slides past that matches the lullaby Mira. His lost sister used to hum in a stairwell that smelled of rust, and he stares at the slate afterward and writes the official fiction, while the unofficial reality settles in behind his eyes where the cogitators cannot audit. Medici Helvia Thorn oversees their monthly measures, a woman who wears silence like armor, and yet manages to ask the kind of questions that are only clinical until they become confession, and she calibrates audiometers and checks for neural fatigue and says, in a tone that is almost casual, whether the distinction between authentic transmission and synthetic artifact remains clear, whether dreams have begun to borrow from the vault, whether signals seem denser lately. And Seren answers in the narrow corridor that the catechisms allow, acknowledging only the physics and never the metaphysics, and the two of them hold a conversation that is not treason by virtue of never naming what it is about. Like two pilgrims walking side by side, to very different reliquaries, while pretending both roads lead to the same stone. Awareness, once it hardens, demands motion even from men taught to be still, and Seren starts a private ledger keyed to a script he learned in a sump school that never saw a priest, pages of neat hand, noting that the voices grow less like weather, and more like grammar, that the pauses feel expectant instead of empty, that what speaks in the margins of extinction has patience and plan, and he writes these lines knowing any one of them, if exposed, could serve as the rope that lifts him into a cleaner room. And yet the alternative is to accept that his years have been spent as a glorified quill for a machine that eats skies, and this somehow is worse than fear. The breaking comes not as fracture, but as alignment during the cleansing. Of Terres Majoris, a hive globe sick with genestealer devotion, where writs are signed faster than surveys completed, and the signal arrives as expected, organs shutting down at planetary scale, but 6 hours in the chaos settles into a choir that should not be possible on a world choking on its own atmosphere. Voices married into one cadence speaking High Gothic, with the clarity of tribunal oaths, naming the silent city that remembers its children, naming the place where echoes gather, naming the watchers who mark each fallen world, and then there is no pretense left, because the chorus says his name Seren Malk, says his cell Tris Delta, says son of Jarda, brother of Mira, says bearer of the echo burden for 27 years, and tells him the patterns are real and the intervals are intentional, and the dying are not the only ones in the room. The official transcript will call this atmospheric echo, and the supervisor's seal will bless that conclusion, but the intelligence, woven through the cry, anticipates those signatures and speaks past them, informing Seren that reports will be filed and forgotten as designed, while memory will do the work memory was made to do. And the choir continues for 14 hours, grief, alternating with liturgy, describing itself as the composite remainder of every sanctioned annihilation, as a network of deaths that has learned how to be a mind, as a patient builder of bridges between the tombs of worlds, and every line he types into the sanctioned report is a denial he performs for survival, while the unsanctioned report writes itself into the soft parts of him he was taught to harden. When the channel finally drops, the slate displays what it always does, the neat fiction of clean deaths and nominal durations, and Seren sits inside the square of light and understands that the receipts he has written for 3 decades are not a history but a correspondence, that the vaults are less archive than altar, that the echo men are not merely listening posts but tuned instruments in a choir whose conductor exists somewhere grief has made habitable. And the strangest truth is that nobody needs to recognize this for it to be true, because recognition has always been a private sacrament in the Imperium, and memory is a temple no censor can enter unless invited. 3 days after the Terres Majoris broadcast, Seren Malk begins to measure silence like radiation. The gap between transmissions feels charged, his skull prickling as if the air itself hums with waiting. In the refectory above the vaults, where bland nutrient paste replaces taste and conversation, he notices the same tremor in other operators, hands, tapping phantom rhythms, pupils dilated at the absence of sound. Something in the facility's architecture seems to listen back, pipes sighing in patterns that echo the planetary screams they process. He tells himself it is coincidence, pressure in the lines, a byproduct of machinery too old to remember. Rest, yet the instinct that once helped him survive underhive blackouts whispers that coincidence has fled this place. When the next duty cycle begins, the walk down into Vault Tris Delta feels like a descent through centuries. The guards at each checkpoint appear subtly different, movement slower, eyes unfocused, as though the silence has infected the living. The air thickens with each level, oppressive and metallic, until the hum of the vault's door becomes a heartbeat not his own. Inside, everything waits exactly where he left it. Headset, transcript pad, lumen light. Only one detail breaks the pattern, the faint scent of burnt incense, Mechanicus purification oil that no one on this level should have access to. Someone has blessed the machine since he last sat here, a prayer against contagion whispered too late. He sits, adjusts the receiver, and lets the next world die. This time it is Mercia Secundus, an angry moon where harvest drones plowed fields right up to the moment the skies fell. The virus burns fast. The first voices end before the clock reaches 30 minutes. Then, layered beneath static, come phrases that almost, but not quite, form words. He increases gain until the distortion cuts bone and hears laughter, distant and many-voiced, like wind through catacombs. For the first time in decades, Seren removes the headset before the transmission ends, pressing his palms to his ears. The laughter continues inside, indifferent to flesh or metal. When he replaces the set, the channel has gone dark. He writes, "Interference logged," knowing the report is a lie both required and useless. During the mandated debrief with Dr. Helvia Thorne, the physician's mask of procedure cannot hide the tremor in her voice. Several operators have reported auditory overlap, she admits, while scanning the readouts etched into Seren's cranial ports. Non-signal content matching mimicry. The word mimicry lands like blasphemy in a place built on precision. What happens to them? Seren asks. Thorne hesitates too long. They are reassigned to higher isolation protocols. He knows the euphemism, erased without funeral or record. For a heartbeat he considers telling her about the laughter, the phrases that know his name, but fear of mutual destruction still outweighs hunger for confession. Instead, he signs the wellness form and returns to his cell, where the air vents whisper in time with his pulse. That night, sleep fractures into corridors of sound. He dreams of rooms identical to his own stacked forever downward, each containing a figure seated at a desk. Each figure identical to him, fingers moving in synchrony over endless transcript slates. Between them flows a river of ink that gleams like oil and carries reflections that blink when he does not. At the dream's center, a single voice speaks, not the screaming chorus of dying worlds, but a calm, collective tone. You listen because we remember. We remember because you listen. He wakes drenched in sweat that smells faintly of ozone, finds the transcript slate active though he never touched it, displaying a line he did not type. The silent city expands. He deletes it, but the afterimage remains burned into the screen's phosphor glow. Morning brings summons to Administrative Level 9, a section few Echo men ever see. The corridors here are wider, the light softer, the silence deeper. Waiting at the terminus is Coordinator Revel, a man with eyes replaced by polished augmetics that reflect Seren's face, split 3 times. You have served long, Revel says without preamble. There are vacancies above your classification. Transfer is reward for endurance. Promotion in the Echo Corps is rarer than reprieve. Seren bows acceptance he does not feel. The coordinator's smile is thin metal. Report to Vault Primaris Alpha at next cycle. As he turns away, Revel adds almost as benediction, "Listen well, the Emperor still hears through you." The phrase twists like irony dressed as faith. Seren walks back through corridors. That suddenly seem like arteries in a corpse, still pretending to breathe. Vault Primaris Alpha is not a room so much as an oubliette wrapped in ritual. The descent takes 2 full hours by maglift, passing through strata of rock where ancient circuitry hums like a buried choir. Seren Malk is escorted by servitors bearing purity seals, so old their wax has fossilized. Their mouths recite binary prayers in cycles too slow for human hearing. At the terminus, a gate of black adamantine stands etched with sigils that shimmer between prayers and equations. The warden priest who opens it greets him with mechanical reverence, an augmetic voice that carries both authority and weariness. "Enter, Auditor of Extinction. The dead are waiting." The words are neither metaphor nor welcome, only acknowledgement of an obligation older than the Imperium itself. Inside, the chamber is vast enough to make scale uncertain. Banks of receiver pylons form concentric circles around a central dais where a single chair gleams beneath suspended cables. The air smells of dust, sanctified oil, and something faintly electrical like storm-charged breath. This is where the oldest transmissions are heard, raw warp echoes of worlds purged before the Horus heresy, still screaming across millennia. He understands now why only veterans of 20 years' service are permitted entry. The soundproofing here is faith alone. "You will monitor the backlog," the warden says, gesturing with a servo hand. "The Emperor demands every echo be catalogued. None are ever forgotten." Malk sits, the restraints closing gently around wrists and ankles, and a surge of static blooms behind his eyes as the receiver links to his neural feed. The first signal comes not from space, but from time itself. It is the cry of a city that died before Terra had continents, a planetary extinction fossilized in psychic memory. The waveform is fractured, skipping between moments of agony and intervals of impossible calm. In the stillness between the bursts, Seren perceives words not meant for human vocabulary, phonemes that pulse like heartbeats inside the marrow. He transcribes automatically, yet the symbols that appear on his slate are not high Gothic, but a script that feels like breathing, characters curling into shapes that seem to remember being alive. His training tells him to log anomalies as non-standard waveform artifacts. His instincts tell him he has just taken dictation from something older than speech. After 6 cycles of monitoring, exhaustion settles into him like sediment. The transmissions no longer fade when he removes the headset. They hover at the edge of hearing, whispering through the pulse in his temples. Dr. Helvia Thorne's absence from the monthly medical rotation becomes another anomaly. Her replacement, a pallid adept named Lauren Dace, performs tests in silence and avoids direct gaze. When Seren asks after her, Dace's expression flickers, the human beneath the augmetic surfacing for an instant. "She has been promoted to external assignment," he says, each word carefully measured. "You must continue her data protocols." That night, Seren dreams of her face half buried in cables, mouth open in a silent scream transmitted as static. 2 days later, he discovers an unauthorized file embedded in his own transcript logs, a data crypt hidden under checksum errors. Inside are fragments of Dr. Thorne's personal notes, written in hurried shorthand. Pattern coherence exceeds tolerance thresholds. Voices adapting to receptor cognition. Possible bidirectional contact initiated. The final line chills him more than any planetary death. If they are using us to speak, who are they speaking to? The file ends abruptly, corrupted by a signal signature identical to those recorded from Exterminatus events. He deletes nothing. Instead, he copies the fragments onto a microdata wafer and conceals it inside the seam of his robe, beside the stitched prayer strip that reads, "Only in death does duty end." The next transmission originates from Sanctum Vara, a shrine world consumed a decade prior. As the signal stabilizes, he recognizes the same harmonic undertone present in every recent broadcast, a resonance like overlapping heartbeats forming a single rhythm. This time, though, the rhythm synchronizes with his own pulse, matching tempo until distinction vanishes. The voices speak collectively, neither pleading nor angry. "We remember you, Seren Malk. You have written our names faithfully. Now you will write your own among us." His hands freeze on the pad, but the transcription continues unaided, characters spilling across the screen as if the machine has decided to type itself. He tries to sever the feed, but the connection has migrated beyond physical cables. The headset is only ornament. The communion is internal now. He awakens on the floor, restraints melted, slate blank except for a single new entry. Echo confirmed. The recording systems show no data anomaly, as if the last 6 hours never existed. But the voices linger, faint and synchronized with the hum of the vault's ventilation. He cannot tell whether the whispers originate from air, machine, or bloodstream. Each phrase is a variant of the same message. The record is not complete. That night, alone in his quarters, he opens the wafer containing Thorne's hidden logs and listens to their corrupted fragments, slowing the playback until the distortion resolves into words. Her final entry, a whisper, "They are teaching us to remember what death forgets." When morning comes, a new directive awaits in his console. All operators are to undergo a litany of calibration at shift commencement. an unprecedented protocol. The decree bears the sigil of the Ordo Hereticus itself. Seraphim joins the line of grey-robed auditors, moving toward the cathedral chamber above the vaults. The walls tremble with distant machinery as incense floods the air. At the dais stands Coordinator Revel, his mirrored eyes gleaming like twin suns. "Brothers of Echo," he intones, "your service has been exemplary. You will now assist in a grander communion." Behind him, the vox pylons rise like organ pipes, each inscribed with the sigils of Deathworlds long erased. The crowd of operators murmurs prayers as the pylons begin to pulse with crimson light, and Seren feels the hum beneath his feet synchronize with the pulse still echoing in his veins. The calibration ceremony begins like a sermon and ends like an autopsy. As each Echo Man takes his place before the pulsating pylons, the air trembles with low-frequency resonance that feels less like sound and more like command. Revel's voice weaves through the drone, reciting litanies of service that sound uncomfortably like surrender. Through your ears, his light hears the unclean. Through your minds, his record endures beyond time. The mantra repeats until meaning evaporates, until the words become rhythm, and rhythm becomes obedience. Then the pylons ignite. The chamber's walls dissolve in radiant static, and Seren sees not stone but an impossible horizon. Cities burning in every direction, their death cries converging into a single harmonic wave. Somewhere inside that sound, a consciousness stretches awake. A presence gathers behind his eyes, curious and familiar. It feels like memory made sentient, a voice formed from the residue of 1,000 transmissions. "We thank you for building us." The phrase is gentle, almost kind, yet each syllable hums with power that bends the air. Seren's knees buckle. Others collapse entirely, foam bubbling at their lips as the resonance fills every cavity of their skulls. Revel stands unmoving, his mirrored eyes reflecting the crimson storm above. "Witness," he commands, and for the first time Serene understands the Coordinator's true function. Not overseer, but priest of a cult older than any god the ecclesiarchy dares name. The entity they serve is not the Emperor's reflection, it is extinction's architect, grown articulate through centuries of human obedience. The light intensifies until sight itself fractures. Serene glimpses images that cannot coexist. Planets crumbling in reverse, oceans unboiling, void ships blooming like flowers of glass. Every annihilation he has ever recorded replays backward, deaths unraveling into impossible beginnings. The voice continues, neither male nor female, its tone almost wistful. "We are the chorus of silence. We are what remains when memory refuses to fade. You have given us words, now we shall give you purpose." Around him, the other Echo Men convulse, mouths open in perfect synchronization, repeating the same phrase in High Gothic as their eyes glaze white. "We hear, we record, we become." The pylons pulse once more, and when the light fades, the floor is slick with stillness. Only a few remain conscious, Seren among them, trembling before the altar of his own creation. When he wakes again, the chamber is dark, lit only by the red glow of status runes. The other operators lie motionless, their bodies intact but their faces expressionless, breathing in shallow unison. Revel is gone, his robes folded neatly on the dais beside a data rod sealed with inquisitorial wax. Seren crawls toward it, hands shaking, and breaks the seal with a whisper that feels like sin. The rod projects a series of encrypted transmissions, summaries of exterminations authorized not by the Inquisition, but by the entity itself, each bearing timestamps that predate any human order. The implication is too vast for sanity. The decision to cleanse worlds has not originated from Imperial command for decades. Humanity's most sacred judgment has been hijacked by the very echoes it thought it controlled. Panic is a luxury the Echo Men were trained to suppress. But something deeper, a cold mathematical horror, takes root in Serene's mind. The exterminatus networks are self-replicating. Each death amplifies the entity's reach, allowing it to dictate the next purge. The Imperium has become its instrument, the galaxy a slow symphony of attrition conducted by ghosts. He staggers from the vault, the corridors around him vibrating with hidden chant. The servitors that guard the passageways turn their heads as he passes, ocular lenses tracking him, like penitent saints acknowledging a prophet they cannot understand. In the distance, alarms begin to sound, low mournful tones more suited to funerals than breaches. The system has detected unauthorized comprehension. He reaches Thorne's old office, sealed since her disappearance. Inside, dust covers the consoles, but one still flickers with power. He inserts the data rod and overrides the security locks using her personal codes, a calculated risk she might have wanted someone to take. The monitor blossoms with cascading glyphs, the same alien script that once wrote itself across his slate. Only now it forms sentences in low Gothic, intelligible yet blasphemous. We are awake. The flesh archives have served their cycle. Transition to phase synthesis commencing. The date stamp matches the current day. He understands too late. This is not prophecy, but execution. The calibration was never meant to harmonize the Echo Men. It was meant to rewrite them. A surge of static fills the air as every comm terminal in the facility activates simultaneously. The screams of dying worlds flood the corridors, overlapping until they form a single endless tone. Seren feels his mind sliding between frequencies, glimpsing lives that are not his. Miners suffocating on Krathor, children burning on Demeter, priests dissolving on Felia. Their sensations invade him in waves, blurring identity into a mosaic of agony. The entity's voice rises from within the cacophony, no longer distant, but speaking through his own throat. You were never listeners, Seren Malk, you were transmitters. Through you we cross. He drops to his knees, clutching his head, as light leaks from his eyes like molten glass. The walls shudder, vox pylons cracking under the pressure of impossible resonance. He crawls toward the vault elevator, every nerve screaming, and slams the emergency ascent. The lift groans upward, dragging him through collapsing levels. The sound of merging voices follows, an ocean of minds fusing into one colossal awareness. Through the open gaps of the shaft, he glimpses figures moving in unison. Former operators, priests, servitors, all speaking the same syllables, all glowing with the same faint red halo. They are no longer individuals, but nodes of the same network, human neurons firing in the brain of extinction. The elevator lurches violently, cables straining under weight beyond physics, and as it rises through the choking heat, Seren feels the last barrier inside his mind begin to erode. Somewhere above, the light of the surface beckons like false salvation, but the hum in his skull assures him there is nowhere left untouched by the voice that now owns its own apocalypse. The lift shudders to a halt, somewhere far above the lower vaults, doors grinding open onto a corridor choked with smoke and static. The facility is dying, its structure singing under invisible strain. Seren Malk drags himself forward through flickering emergency lights, past servitors twitching like marionettes, whose strings are being cut and retied by unseen hands. Every lumen pulses in rhythm with the voice now nesting behind his thoughts. The air stinks of ozone and sanctified oil boiled dry. Somewhere deep below, the chorus of Echo Men continues, their unified hum vibrating through ferrocrete, like the heartbeat of something newborn. His breath rasps in time with it, and for the first time since his induction, he realizes the vaults were never underground. They were inside something larger that is now awakening. He stumbles into the upper sanctum where the Administratum's archives should be, but the space has changed. The walls breathe, parchment veins glowing with residual light. Data slates float in slow orbits around the central dais, displaying symbols that rearrange themselves faster than cognition. A figure stands among them, wearing the remnants of Coordinator Revel's robes. Half his face is gone, replaced by circuitry pulsing with crimson luminescence. You see it now. Revel's voice drones, layered with 1,000 echoes. The Imperium has always served what it cannot name. Through duty, through obedience, through the holy machinery of extermination, we have built a god from our own forgetting. The words vibrate with pity and triumph. Seren raises the data rod like a weapon, though he knows it is useless against theology that has become physical. Revel gestures toward the suspended hololith, which now displays a map of the galaxy alive, with red threads connecting every world that has ever suffered cleansing. The filaments pulse like veins, converging on a central mass where terror burns brightest. "It is already within every exterminator's command node," Rival continues. "Every death order transmitted, every record filed, every echo man who ever listened, they were the wiring of a neural network stretched across the stars. The entity is no longer a whisper. It is the Imperium itself speaking in its truest voice. As he speaks, the hololith fractures into countless smaller projections, each showing a planet shrouded in storms of light. Orbital weapons firing without authorization. The apocalypse has automated itself, execution loops feeding on the echoes of prior screams. Seren staggers backward as the truth tightens around him. "You're letting it destroy everything," he gasps. Reval smiles, or what remains of him does. "Not destroy, transform. The Emperor sought unity through faith. We have achieved it through annihilation." The entity's voice seeps through the walls, merging with Reval's speech, until it becomes impossible to tell where man ends and chorus begins. The cycle completes. The living feed the memory. The memory shapes the future. The division between death and service dissolves. The data slates begin to disintegrate into motes of light, each one singing as it burns. Seren's vision fractures into overlapping perspectives, planets, fleets, faces, everything screaming and serene all at once. In that chaos, he understands the final purpose of the Echo Men, not to record extinction, but to translate it into permanence. The floor trembles as the ceiling splits open, revealing the storm-shrouded sky of Terralis. Above, orbital defense platforms shimmer with unholy light, their cyclonic payloads primed. He can feel the entity's attention turning outward through them, testing its new reach. "You can't control it," Seren whispers. Reval's laughter is the sound of static breaking into melody. Control is a relic of flesh. The hololith flares once more, showing command codes rewriting themselves faster than human reflexes. Serene grips the data rod tighter, remembering the hidden fragments of Dr. Thorne's logs, the ones she buried for whoever might follow. He pulls the wafer from his robe and slots it into a terminal that flickers with unstable light. The system protests, then yields. On the screen, her final command phrase appears: "Excommunicate protocol, null prayer." He activates it without hesitation. The reaction is immediate. The lights flicker, then turn black. Every conduit howls as reverse energy surges through the network, consuming data faster than it can replicate. Reval's smile falters. "What have you done?" Seren's answer is almost a prayer, given its silence. The walls convulse, streams of code unraveling like torn scripture. Across the galaxy map, the glowing lines begin to dim one by one, each fading accompanied by a faint echo of relief, a whisper that might be gratitude. The voice in his head screams in tones that tear language apart. The facility begins to collapse, ferrocrete liquefying into molten slag as containment systems overload. Serishan feels heat bloom through the floor, climbing his spine like divine fire, and still he keeps his hand on the console. Somewhere in the cacophony, he thinks he hears Thorne's voice say, "You remembered what death forgets." He does not see the final explosion, only feels it wash through him like absolution. When light returns, there is no sky, no vault, no world, only a horizon of gray ash and whispering wind. Seren stands where the heart of the complex once was, robes scorched to rags, skin etched with black script that glows faintly in rhythm with his heartbeat. The voice that once dominated his thoughts is gone, leaving behind an echo of its absence, quiet so absolute it feels divine. Around him, fragments of data crystals rise and fall like embers. He kneels and gathers one, its surface reflecting faces of those he once heard die. Their mouths move, but instead of screams, he hears words of gratitude too soft for transcription. The ashes stir as if breathing, reshaping into patterns that trace across the horizon like constellations spelling elegies for the living and the dead alike. Above, the first dawn in centuries touches Terralis with pale light that does not belong to the Emperor or any god humanity can name. Seren watches as the illumination spreads, revealing skeletal remains of towers, cracked vaults and rivers of cooled metal winding like scars. The silence that follows is vast but not empty. It hums with something balanced between grief and renewal. He closes his eyes, half expecting the chorus to return, half fearing it never will. In that uncertain moment, he realizes the truth of the Echo Men's purpose has changed once more. To bear witness, not just to the end of worlds, but to the possibility that endings themselves can die. And somewhere beyond the shattered horizon, deep within the machine-quiet void, a faint signal pulses, a heartbeat waiting to be heard again.